Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final edition of the FIA AI Pilot webinar, Conscious Consumption in a Post-COVID-19 Normal in India. My name is May, and I'm from Food Industry Asia. So before we begin, I'll just like to inform you that the format of today's session is 25 minutes of presentation by our speaker, followed up by 25 minutes of Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in the questions box that is on the right side of your screen, and we will address it during the Q&A segment. And again, all attendees will be muted for the entire session, and the webinar will be recorded. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Salome, who is the Head of Innovation and Insights at AI Pilot.
Thank you so much for that introduction, May, and thanks to everybody joining us today. So India has been particularly badly hit with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as the country tackles an increase in the number of cases, what we've seen is that even today, most of the country is still in lockdown because of that. We at AI Palette, in collaboration with Food Industry Asia, have used AI and machine learning to analyze public data to understand which behaviors which have emerged in the context of COVID-19 have actually stuck as the pandemic progressed. In today's discussion, we'll also look at how different stakeholders in the food and beverage industry are adapting to this new normal. We've called this series Conscious Consumption because what we see is that all across Asia, consumers are becoming much more mindful when it comes to decisions with respect to food. And we see this in the Indian market as well. With that, let me walk you through what we'll discuss today. So for those of you joining us for the first time, I'll start by telling you a little bit about AI Palette. Then we'll walk you through the approach that we use for this study. Then we look at how the drivers and motivations have evolved as the pandemic has progressed. We'll also cover how different product categories are growing and declining. Then we'll also cover some patterns and opportunities which have emerged in the context of COVID-19 and how different players in the food and beverage space are tapping into these. And lastly, since India is, of course, a very diverse country, we'll also do a regional analysis as well. Without further ado, let me dig straight in. So AI Palette is a Singapore-based startup backed by the government of Singapore. We essentially use AI and machine learning to work with companies in the food and beverage space to essentially help them analyze and predict trends in real time. Next, going into what makes our approach unique. So essentially, first of all, we focus on data which is specific to food and beverages. So our patented algorithm is trained on data which is specific to food and beverages. And the reason that is really key is because the language that consumers use in context of food tends to be quite unique. I'll give you an example. For instance, when consumers talk about the word hot when in context of food, they typically are referring to something which is spicy and rich in chili and not to the temperature, which is why we train our data, our algorithm on food and beverage specific data. Secondly, for every market that we looked at, we've covered the data sources which are local and most relevant and popular in that market. And lastly, our algorithm is language agnostic. What that essentially translates to is that it has been trained to understand multiple non-English languages. So for today's analysis, we've analyzed and crunched a total of 217 million consumer data points over the time period from January of 2019 up until August of 2020. The 2019 data helps us establish a baseline, and then we've split the 2020 data into two parts. The first 4 months of the year, which we cover as phase 1, and then the next 4 months, which we look at as phase 2. The reason we've done this is essentially to help understand how consumer needs and drivers have evolved as the pandemic has essentially increased in severity in India. For today's analysis, we'll look at a variety of different public data sources. So we'll look at social media data from the likes of Instagram and Twitter, search engine and search volume data from Google, and retail products data from players like Amazon. One keynote I'd like to add here is that this is not a survey that we're analyzing today. We're essentially tapping into millions of public consumer conversations. So the methodology that we use is that firstly, we start by identifying which sources are relevant to a particular market. Then our algorithm essentially collects the data. After that, we enter the phase of analysis, which is where the proprietary AI algorithm essentially identifies emerging patterns. And finally, the output is typically presented in the form of a dashboard that our clients can access. But today, for ease of sharing, we've put together this report. With that, let's dig straight in to see how drivers and motivations have evolved during the COVID-19 pandemic. So firstly, what we see in India is that there has always been a very strong preference for food that is homemade and home cooked. And that continues to be the case even during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we also see a shift in drivers. While at the start of the pandemic, as the drivers in this part of the slide show us, the focus was more around concerns around availability of produce, as well as packaging and price consciousness as well. There has been a shift in those drivers, while now consumers are really seeking a balance between health and taste. So as the numbers here show, health and taste are still very much the two top key drivers. At the same time, what we see in that, as there is a lack of household help in India during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in tier 1 cities, consumers are looking for food which is easy to prepare and quick to make. At the same time, there is also a very strong preference for food which is natural and which also helps in other aspects like weight loss. Let's first dig into the top driver, which was taste. So overall, what we see is that consumers in India are really seeking solace from food which is familiar, which is what has led to this increase in consumer interest in comfort food. So because of the strong emotional connection that consumers have with food, they're really relying on food to help restore their sense of normalcy. As the graph here shows, consumer conversations which talk about taste and different aspects of taste are currently at an all-time high over the time period that we've analyzed. And it's currently reflected in 48 million consumer data points. So it really goes to show how consumers are relying on food which is familiar and comforting to them during these uncertain times. Next, digging into the driver of health. So when we look at health, what we see is that health, of course, still continues to be a key area of focus and a key driver when it comes to consumer decisions. And in particular, the preference for food which helps in boosting immunity still continues to be strong. As the graph here shows, while there was a significant spike in the month of March when it comes to conversations around health, the trend still is significantly higher if you compare it to the same period last year. The one additional aspect that I'd like to highlight here is that in addition to a focus on food which helps in boosting immunity, there are also other emerging needs. For instance, food which is rich in protein, or food that helps in weight loss and for fitness conscious consumers, which we also see rising in the context of COVID-19. Next, what we've done is we've picked out examples from these 47 million consumer data points that we analyzed to show you how different stakeholders in the food and beverage space are responding to this need. So overall, what we see is that across categories, there has been a significant surge in products which are positioning themselves as immunity boosters. We see this, we've picked out a few examples from a few categories. For instance, in the dairy category, we see players like Amul, which have launched both milk and even ice cream products, which incorporate natural home remedies like ginger, tulsi, and turmeric. Next, coming into the digging into the product of bakery, what we see is that even within the bakery category, there are players like, for instance, Born Group, which has launched a loaf of bread, which they are positioning as being rich in antioxidants and which helps boost immunity. This bread incorporates ingredients like turmeric, black pepper, oregano, and different kinds of seeds. We also see this trend in the yogurt category as well, with different products being launched. For instance, Milky Mist has positioned themselves as being rich in bifidobacterium 12, which helps both in keeping digestive health healthy as well as it helps boost immunity. Next, digging into the driver which we highlighted, which was ease of preparation. So here what we see is that a combination of the lack of household help and the concerns that consumers have when it comes to safety has essentially really propelled this increase in launches of meal kits. We see this trend really unfolding not only in the premium category, but also in the street food category. So when we look at the premium category, what we see is that fine dining restaurants and QSR chains have essentially modified their product offering to become more home friendly. Some examples we've picked out here are from some fine dining restaurants which are offering different kinds of meal kits for everything from pasta, pizza to kadhai paneer. At the same time, even QSR brands like KFC have essentially been promoting content which shows how to incorporate the KFC chicken in recipes at home. So they're really tapping into this significant increase in consumer interest when it comes to home cooking. That was a look at the premium category. Let's next look at the fast food category. So here what we see is that different brands are essentially, even in the street food category, have launched meal kits which help consumers essentially satiate their cravings for their favorite street food. Some examples we've picked out here are from restaurants like Veg Box, which offers different kinds of meal kits for everything, right from pav bhaji to chole bhature, which are all very popular street foods in India. So this was a few examples of meal kits which have tapped into this underlying need and increase in demand for food which is quick and easy to prepare. Next, going into the increase in consumer demand for natural food. So overall, there still continues to be a very strong demand for food which is natural. That's driven in part by the preference of the Indian consumer, But then we also see this focus on holistic health as well coming through in the consumer conversations. This need for natural food in part is driven by restaurants and cafes which are promoting it. But at the same time, we also have consumers who are really looking for meals which are natural and healthy. Next, going into the consumer driver for food, which helps in controlling diet. So here what we see is that as a result of the sedentary lifestyle, which has basically come about as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown, what we see is that there is an increase in exploration when it comes to products which are vegan and which even offer keto diet products. This is in part driven by, of course, from the consumer side, it is driven by the need to lose weight, which a lot of consumers feel they have put on because of the lockdown. At the same time, it is also driven in part by the retail products which are being launched as well. Here we've picked out a few examples. For instance, Epigamia has launched into this increasing need for keto products by launching coconut milk yogurt. At the same time, we also have other brands which are essentially offering low carb variety of different Indianized snacks like matti. Now that we've looked at how the different drivers have been evolving in the context of COVID-19, let's next dig into the different food categories to see how those drivers have affected them and which categories are growing and declining. So firstly, what we see is that there continues to be a very strong demand for food that is fresh, whether that is fruits and vegetables or freshly cooked food. At the same time, because of the increase in cooking at home, there is also an increase in consumer interest for cooking essentials like flour and rice. The other aspect that I want to highlight is that particularly in tier 1 cities where household help was not as easy to come by, there has also been an increase in consumer interest for products which are ready to eat and ready to cook as well. Next, digging into the immunity boosting foods. So here what we see is that consumers in India continue to rely on natural home remedies as well as ayurvedic remedies, essentially remedies which have gained their trust over the years. This shows up in an increase in consumer interest for ingredients like lemon, honey, turmeric, for example, which are all used to make kadha, which is a herbal hot drink, which consumers believe can help boost immunity. Even ingredients like ashwagandha, ginger, and gooseberry have shown a significant increase in consumer interest, primarily driven by this need for natural home remedies that consumers really trust. Next, digging into animal and plant protein. So here what we saw is that when it comes to plant protein, there has been an increase in consumer interest, which is currently primarily being driven by a lot of product launches in this space. And we'll dig into what some of those product launches are a little bit further in the presentation. At the same time, there has also been an increase in consumer interest when it comes to popular sources of animal protein like eggs and chicken, as well as other sources like mushroom. And a lot of that has been driven by the surge in home cooking. So essentially, consumers are cooking much more at home. Next, digging into the categories of bakery, snacks, and dairy. So here what we see is that there is definitely continued strong interest when it comes to snacking. And this is really driven by the snackification of meals in markets like India. At the same time, what we see is that milk, which is definitely considered to be a nutrition essential by the Indian consumer. At the same time, other products in dairy like paneer or cottage cheese have also shown an increase in consumer interest, primarily driven by a combination of home cooking as well as the association of milk with immunity boosting. Next, when we looked at the some products which are very popular in the fast food and restaurant space, what we saw was that there is a decline in consumer interest when it comes to carbonated soft drinks and burgers. And that's primarily driven by the fact that there has been restricted activity. So outdoor activity, which tends to spike during the summer, has been restricted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is what has really led to the decline in consumer interest for products like soft drinks and burgers. At the same time, of course, these products have also been affected by the fact that a lot of restaurants still continue to be shut even today. Pizza is one product category which we see which has shown some increase in consumer interest, and that's a lot of it is driven by home delivery as well as DIY kits, which a lot of these brands are currently pushing. Having seen how the different product categories have evolved in the COVID-19 pandemic, let's next dig into what are some of the patterns and opportunities which are emerging, which different brands in the food and beverage space are really tapping into. So the first pattern that we want to highlight is that of ready to consume foods. So here what we see is that there has been a significant increase in consumer interest when it comes to meal kits and ready to eat food. And a lot of this has been driven by the fact that in tier 1 cities, there has been a lack of domestic help. We see different brands across categories which are tapping into this need. Some examples here are marinated meats launched by Licious, as well as ready to cook and ready to eat packs, which are launched by brands like ID Fresh, essentially to tap into this significant increase in consumer interest for ready to eat food. This has grown by 94% if we see the 2020 data. The second pattern that we want to highlight is that of plant-based food. So here what we see is that across different categories, a lot of startups in the food and beverage space, as well as quick service restaurants, are essentially launching different products which are plant-based in the India market. Some examples that we've highlighted here are, for instance, Starbucks has launched a vegan cold brew, which incorporates soy milk. There are also other brands like Evo Foods, which has launched a plant-based egg alternative, as well as Good Milk, which has basically expanded its range of dairy alternatives. And while these are some examples of more international brands, even local brands like Imagine Meats, which are essentially trying to cater to the local tastes when it comes to protein, have launched different products in India. So Imagine Meats, for instance, has launched products in collaboration with ADM, and they're essentially catering to Indian recipe and the Indian taste buds. The next pattern that we want to highlight is this increase in consumer interest when it comes to more indirect means of building immunity, like gut health. So here what we see is that there is an increase in consumer interest when it comes to seeking ways to boost their natural defense system. This is what has led to an increase in consumer interest in products which aid in digestion, even probiotics, and of course, products which help boost immunity. Some examples that we've picked out here. So what we see is that food innovators as well as influencers are essentially tapping into this increase in consumer interest around gut health. Brands like Mountain Bee, for instance, have launched a monthly kombucha subscription. Kombucha is a fermented tea drink which is known to be very rich in health benefits. So Mountain Bee, for instance, is offering their product offering as an alternative to soft drinks. At the same time, a lot of food bloggers as well are essentially spreading awareness for home remedies which can help in improving gut health. The example we've picked out here, for instance, is a food blogger talking about the benefit of soaked rice and drinking that water to help improve gut health. With that, let's look into how the different regions in India are essentially coping with the COVID-19 pandemic. So here what we've done is we've covered 4 different regions: north, south, east, and west. And across what we see is that there is a very strong preference for food which is convenient, quick, and easy to prepare. At the same time, there continues to be strong demand for food that is natural, and consumers also want to experiment with different food and beverage options. So that has led to an increase in consumer interest around foods which are new and innovative as well. So across the 4 regions, of course, those were some of the similarities. The key differences that we really see is that while in the north and the south, health is the top driver, in the east and the west, taste is the top driver. When we look at the 4 different regions in India, what we see is that there is a strong demand and consumer interest for natural remedies and even ayurvedic medication. So essentially what we see is that in the north and the west in particular, there has been an increase in consumer interest for ingredients like triphala or ashwagandha, which are popular ayurvedic remedies. While in the east and the south, there was an increase in consumer interest for ingredients like amla, which is also known to be very rich in vitamin C, which is the Indian gooseberry. At the same time, ingredients like turmeric and garlic are also very popular. With that, I'd like to just leave you with these key takeaways. So firstly, what we see is that there is an increase in consumer interest for products which are quick and easy to make. So consumers are definitely looking for convenience when they are cooking at home. At the same time, there is a strong demand for natural remedies and Ayurveda, which essentially consumers associate with holistic health beyond immunity. Then there is an increase in consumer interest in experimentation and trying out food which is new and different brands in the plant-based space or even in the keto space are tapping into this increase in consumer interest for experimentation. And lastly, there has been an increase in interest also in gut health and other more indirect ways to boost immunity. With that, we come to the end of the discussion. I'll end with this parting thought. So as we come to the tail end of 2020, what we have seen is that COVID-19 has really accelerated the rate of change of consumer behavior and preferences. So consumers are definitely changing much more rapidly as they deal with this new normal. So if you're interested in understanding more about how consumer behavior is evolving in real time, and if you're interested in seeing how different trends are emerging and changing, please do reach out. My contact details are on the screen. With that, May, we can open the floor up to questions. Thank you so much.